At the turn of the 20th century, a great sense of despair and horror kept the minds of the people. New philosophies introduced existentialism, and voices of men like Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, and Jean-Paul Sartor emerged. Ideas of free will and morality in the face of war and injustice enveloped the minds of the people. Every person questioned the true nature of humans, and these ideas revolutionized the attitude of generations to come. At the root of this horror was the Great Depression and World War II, after which greater thought was placed on the idea of free will, morality, and finding oneself in the midst of all that had occurred. This concept of independence without reference to tradition was coined existentialism, a philosophy that went till the 1970s and is still used by philosophers today as a way of thinking. Key philosophers then were Friedrich Nietzsche, Sardar, and Albert Camus.
Friedrich Nietzsche was the outer edge of existentialism. As a child, he was surrounded by a religion that always seemed to fail him. Without a doubt, he definitely had all the reasons to be indifferent to this concept of religion that he had been brought up with. Once he had given up the idea of religion, he looked around and began to see the thin line between good and bad, and how easily they blurred in everyday life. He began questioning everything that he'd been taught, and why and how certain acts were determined as right or wrong. He saw every man as a supreme judge of himself, and felt that the concept of an overseeing God was merely to satisfy the need for someone to watch over us. The problem was that Nietzsche in popular culture has often been misinterpreted because of his association with the Nazi Party, but his writings of self-judgment have always been used in both sides.
Albert Camus was born into a poor childhood, while the world was on the brink of war. He was naturally led to join the French Communist Party, went on into the anarchist movement once he saw the inequalities between social classes and ethnic groups. Camus first proposed the idea of the absurd in his book The Myth of Sisyphus, in which he described man's futile search for meaning, unity, and clarity. Albert Camus looked at life as dark, desolate, and pointless. In fact, he looked at authors that believed that life might have hope with disdain. Jean-Paul Sartor was one of the leading figures in 20th century philosophy. At a young age, Sartor had a sad childhood and was attracted to philosophy as a young teenager. Later, he was drafted into the French army and started his career when he wrote the book Being and Nothingness. Sartor's main idea in his philosophy is that humans are condemned to be free. His idea shows that there is no such thing as a God, and he puts it in the example of a paper cutter. The creator would have a plan for the paper cutter to have an essence or meaning. But human beings have no essence. Therefore, there cannot be a creator.
God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. Friedrich Nietzsche.
Existentialists could range from Christian speakers like Kierkegaard to atheists like Nietzsche. Nietzsche's quote expresses his contempt for the use of religions to define morality by setting the rules of life. Instead, Nietzsche suggests that man should question the basics and proceed to determine his own truth and ethics.
The absurd is the essential concept and the first truth. Albert Camus.
Along with existentialism, Camus also emphasized the concept of absurd. This idea that the absurd is an inevitable part of life. Chemist defined the concept as a convergence between the human desire for order and the blank, indifferent silence of the universe.
Man is condemned to be free, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. Jean-Paul Sartre.
Here, Sartre voices one of the main points of existentialism. That is, the idea that mankind is not guided by anyone, and must go on his own, without any help at all. Sartre highlights the fact that each man must accept his freedom of will, and the consequences, both negative and positive, associated with them.